Somebody asked, can my child's therapist tell me what they talked about? What do you think? The answer may surprise you. I'm Nicholeen Peck, and I teach all over the world about parenting, good communication, how to build strong family bonds, child development, and education. And I have had children in my home who've been in therapy, so I can tell you what I know there, but also I work with a lot of therapists and train a lot of therapists. And so let's talk about what the rules are for therapy. In this video, we're going to talk about the rules in my state. We're going to talk about the rules in the United States, and then we're going to talk about the rules in a few other countries as well. I think that'll give us a good picture of what the rules really are about your conversation with your child's therapist. I know why you want to talk to your child's therapist. Everybody wants to talk to their child's therapist, and actually, there's a lot of good that can come from that. I think it's actually a bad thing if the therapist does not bring the child's parent into the conversation, because then what happens is you remove the child from their parent and you almost create a situation where the therapist is encouraging gossiping about the parents to them because the parent is never brought in on the same page. So that could actually be really detrimental. There's actually a whole book that goes into a lot of details about that dynamic that can be detrimental, because therapy can even have an iatrogenesis effect, meaning that it can do more harm than good sometimes if it's not done exactly right. This is why parents want to maintain a part of the conversation. They want their child to get the help they need, but they don't want it to create other problems, which it could create. When I did therapeutic treatment care for troubled teens, they all had therapy. That was just part of their court order. They would come to my home for therapeutic treatment care. They also had a therapist that they had to go see besides doing the therapeutic treatment care that was in my home. So when I was knowing that they were having this therapist and then they were doing treatment in my home, I would go to the therapist and say, okay, tell me what's going on here. Tell me what issues you're working on. Can we have a conversation from time to time so that I can make sure that I'm helping them at home? If you're giving them an assignment to do, let's do it, right? At home, let's be part of it, kind of a thing. There was one therapist who, she was like, nope, 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 nope. Patient confidentiality. I'm not going to talk about anything. And I said, okay. 6 months go by. Finally, she's like, you know what? I think I will have a parent conversation and have you come in. I said, okay. So I come in. My foster daughter had been going to this therapist for 6 months. I go in there and she's like, so your foster daughter tells me that she's in dance right now and she's really loving it. And I'm like, no, she's not in dance. She's like, she's not? I'm like, no. And she's like, well, what about the sleepover party she had this last week? I'm sure she had a good time at that. I said, no, she didn't go to a sleepover party. She listed thing after thing, and then issues that they had talked about. Everything she had been told was a lie. My foster daughter was a diagnosed kleptomaniac and compulsive liar. That would have been on the file. But this therapist got sucked completely in. After having a conversation for about an hour and realizing everything she was going to talk to me about was a complete lie, she just said, you know, I don't think I can help this person. I think you're going to have to get a new therapist. Which honestly, I admired her for that, because she realized I don't know how to detect a liar, I guess. And so this is not going to work out. But had she been talking to me all the way along, she would have known. I think some therapists worry about talking to parents because there are some parents who are narcissistic, and those parents want to control everything. They want to tell things behind the scenes. They want to know everything that the child says about them and all that kind of stuff. Therapists are aware that there's that type of personality, so it's a little bit easier to not even deal with the parents just in case they have to deal with that type of personality. But the problem is then the child doesn't get the benefit of having the therapist and the parents on the same page working together, and so that they can get out of treatment sooner. Again, read the book Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier, super good, but let's talk about what's happening in my state. So in my state, a therapist has to keep patient confidentiality unless there's certain exceptions. And what they mean by confidentiality is like, the parent can't go to the therapist and say, what did my child say about me? That's probably the most important part that the therapist cannot share with the parent. But if the child is suicidal, if the child has been abused, or there's something that could be happening that was harmful to the child or could potentially be harmful to the child, Those things can all be talked about with the parents, and a wise therapist or counselor would actually have those conversations with the parent so that the parent is informed, and measures can be taken and security can be put in place, and police can be contacted if necessary, or whatever. They need to be on the same page. Or if the therapist feels like they have to contact the police, that the parent needs to know and understand why and what's going on. Basically, in my state, therapists are encouraged to communicate everything with the parent unless that thing that they communicate could destroy the confidentiality relationship with the minor child that is there. If for some reason there is something that it would be like, listen, if I tell that, that's going to destroy me being able to help them in the therapeutic capacity, then they may not have to, but they might have to make a case for it in court if the parent wants to push it to that level. Generally speaking, parents get general updates. They should also be able to have conversations with the therapist periodically just to kind of give their perspective on things and to get an overview of what's happening so that they're on the same page. Definitely see if you can push for that where you live, but let's talk about the United States in general. HIPAA laws in the United States allow parents to have access to all medical records of their children. So what this means is that they can access their basic medical records or basic therapeutic records. They could get general overviews and reports from a therapist, but they can't necessarily hear every specific confidence that the child has had with the therapist, especially, if it's going to relate to something that was said about the parent, then that's probably not going to be said. So really, you can see a lot of alignment there with the state I live and the country. In the United Kingdom, they have a policy called Gillick competent, which means that if a minor is able to comprehend their own treatment, then they have to keep confidentiality. But if they are young enough that they don't fully comprehend their treatment, then the parent is able to know everything about the treatment. Canada's laws for confidentiality and protection of confidentiality of minors are very similar to the United States, so look up their exact laws for more specifics, but it's pretty similar. And then Australia, they are very similar to the United Kingdom. So if a child is more mature, they have like this maturity standard. If they seem more mature, that they can understand things a little bit better, then they don't have to disclose stuff to parents, and they can keep complete confidentiality for the child. But otherwise, the parent is brought into the conversation. In the EU, parents can have access to things related to the safety of the child, but privacy is pretty strictly protected in the majority of the countries in the EU. So the general rule with therapists is that therapists are trained to keep confidentiality of children that come to visit with them. So if you have a minor child that's visiting with a therapist and you want to talk to the therapist about something that's going on, I would actually make sure that when you start therapy with that therapist that you say, hey, what are your policies on how you engage with parents? Because I want to be part of what's going on here. I want to help them at home. I don't anticipate having them in treatment year after year after year. We want to just kind of do a short stretch of things. So whatever things you're telling them to do, I want to follow through with. So could we have regular conversations? How do you feel about that? I would have those conversations up front with your therapist. I'm also really picky about therapists anyway. I would ask lots of questions. I ask them lots of their different principles and beliefs and all kinds of things because they are going to be a mentor for my child. So I want to make sure there's a really good alignment there. I wouldn't want someone mentoring my child who has a different ideological belief than my child or my family has. So, as you're asking a lot of these questions to pick the right therapist, I would have one of the questions be, how is it that we engage with each other? Have that question up front. If something's been going on with the therapist and the therapist won't actually talk to you, switch therapists. I know the child may say, no, don't do it, but it's okay. It's okay to switch therapists, somebody who will have a better communication with you. But also, as you're talking with the therapist or thinking about having the communication, don't get into all the little nitty-gritties. Don't be saying, hey, listen, did my child tell you that this about me? Because that's a lie. Don't go down that road. The therapist is not your parent. They're not your judge. You don't have to justify yourself to them. They're there to help your child. If it's not helping, if the child is getting worse because of their time with the therapist, again, get a new therapist or discontinue therapy altogether. Anyway, there you go. There's some tips from a former therapeutic treatment care parent. I will say there are many other tips that I could give you, tips related to how to calmly correct your children, how to help them take personal responsibility and self-government for themselves. You may want to look into some of those things. There is a video, it's a full-length class on this channel, all about self-government teaching and the skills and principles of self-government. It is called The Not So Known Secret for Parenting Success. I highly recommend you click on that video next.